Good morning and a happy Monday to you all. I cannot imagine a better way to start the week than with each of you. I went out for a few drinks a couple of nights ago, which I haven't done much this new year so far. And for the first time in a long time, zero anxiety the next day. It was wonderful, I'm telling you. I even asked for a girl's number and got rejected. Still had a blast. Zero regrets. For today, I know that I've hated on unsolved or cold cases in the past, mainly since they're extremely frustrating. But my palate is slowly evolving, and a taste for those unsolved yet solvable cases has crept in a little bit more. Who knows, maybe one day one of you highly attentive listeners will help solve a cold case. Okie dokie. Today, I bring you back to the wonderful continent of Australia for the Wanda Beach murders. My name is Eli, and this is Murder in the Morning. Wanda, which means sandy hills, was named by the indigenous inhabitants of the area now known as Cronulla, a suburb of Sydney in New South Wales. Cronulla, spelled Cronulla, according to Wikipedia, is a very popular tourist destination as well as a popular local spot. Located on a peninsula, Cronulla attracts many beachgoers from all over Sydney. Cronulla Beach itself features a long stretch of sand that runs from Boat Harbour to North Cronulla, followed by rock pools and another sandy beach at South Cronulla. To name just a few beaches that Cronulla has to offer, we've got Green Hills Beach, Blackwoods Beach, Shelley Beach, Oak Park Beach, and Wanda Beach. Suffice it to say, a lot of beaches. And then you have Shark Island, just off Cronulla Beach, which is a famous surfing spot and the site of the annual Shark Island Challenge bodyboarding contest. Basically, my dream place to retire, surrounded by water and sand. Our story today takes place in the 1960s, and oh boy, were they an exciting time in Australia. Sydney was known as the drag capital of the world. Awesome. It was the first time a US president ever visited Australia, and an Australian prime minister disappeared during the 1960s. But the coolest bit of all, quote, a federal council fought for the rights of the Aboriginal people to be recognized in line with other civil rights movements occurring overseas. And, quote, a referendum in 1967 called for the public to make a choice, leading to the beginnings of legal recognition for those inhabitants. Okay, enough history lessons. Let's get into it. On the morning of Tuesday, January 12, 1965, the bodies of two 15-year-old girls were discovered by a man walking along Wanda Beach. Positively identified as Marianne Schmidt and Christine Chirac, the two girls had been terribly beaten and abused before their deaths. Both had long scratches across their faces. Christine's skull was cracked from a blow to the back of her head, and then the attacker stabbed her 14 times. It appeared to investigators from the drag marks in the sand that after Christine was attacked from behind, Marianne fled, only to be chased down by the attacker, who proceeded to slash her throat and stab her 6 more times before towing her body back to Christine's. An autopsy confirmed that they hadn't been sexually assaulted, but not for lack of trying. Their underwear had been cut, but thankfully investigators found his DNA on top of their clothing. An extensive search was conducted in and around the Wanda Beach area in hopes of finding the murder weapon. Thousands of pounds of sand was sifted through, but nothing related to the girls' murder was found. According to Wikipedia, the day before, on January 11th, Marianne, Christine, and Marianne's 4 younger siblings, I love these names, Helmut Jr., Hans, Peter, Trixie, and Wolfgang. They made the short journey to the coast for a day at Wanda Beach. Arriving at around 11 a.m., it was very windy and the beach was closed. So the group then walked down to the southern end of the beach and sheltered among the rocks. 8-year-old Wolfgang still wanted to swim, so Marianne went with him to a shallow part of the surf away from the rocks. After they returned to the group, they all had a picnic, and at some point during this picnic, Christine left the others and went off by herself. When she returned to the group, they decided to go for a walk into the sandy hills behind Wanda Beach. Around 1 p.m., the group reached a point around 400 meters or 430 yards beyond the Wanda Surf Club. They stopped to take shelter behind a sandhill as the younger children were complaining about the windy conditions. Marianne told her younger siblings that she and Christine would return to the rocky area on the south end of the beach where they had left their bags, then return to fetch the young children and head home. Instead, the girls continued into the sandy hills, and when Peter, one of the kids, told them they were going the wrong way, they laughed at him and continued to walk on. The Schmidt children remained waiting behind the sandhill until around 5 p.m., at which time they finally returned to collect their bags, including Marianne's and Christine's purses, and went home on the very last train, arriving home around 8 p.m. And by 8:30 that night, both girls had been reported missing. The next morning, Peter Smith, the man on his walk, stumbled across the girls. These brutal and simply unnecessary slayings rocked the community and Australia to its core. Soon, this investigation would become the largest in Australia's history. The police would go on to interview over 7,000 people throughout this investigation. They wanted to find this killer like no one had before. Unfortunately, as we know, the case turns very cold very soon. Out of 7,000 people, only a few stood out as suspects. Christopher Wilder, better known as the Beauty Queen Killer or the Snapshot Killer, was responsible for abducting over a dozen young girls and killing at least 8 of them during a 6-week killing spree in the United States during the 1980s. But before that roller coaster of insanity, Wilder was born and grew up in the Sydney area of New South Wales, Australia. And 2 years prior to the Wanda Beach killings, Wilder had been convicted of a gang rape on Sydney Beach. Unfortunately, the DNA evidence was useless essentially for another 40 years or so that had been collected, and the investigators could not tie him to any of these new murders. Wilder then emigrated or fled to the United States in 1969, but while visiting his parents back in Australia in 1982, he was charged with sexual offenses against 2 15-year-old girls who he had forced to pose nude. He made, and still kind of makes, a great suspect. Not to leave you hanging on that front, Christopher Wilder would go on to kill himself during a struggle with the police in New Hampshire whoop, whoop, in 1984. Years passed without any progress. It wouldn't be until 1975 that another suspect would come into light. A former detective by the name of Johnson, who had previously worked the Wanda case, was given an odd painting by Alan Bassett. Alan Bassett had been in jail for years for the 1966 murder of Carolyn Orphan in the town of, forgive my pronunciation, Wollongong, only about 39 miles or so from Cronulla. Quote, Bassett's painting titled A Bloody Awful Thing showed an abstract landscape, and Johnson believed that the painting showed blood trails, a broken knife blade, the body of a victim, and he became convinced that Bassett was the Wanda Beach killer. He was also convinced that the painting showed a scene from the murders that only the killer would know. Despite the skepticism of other detectives, Johnson wrote a book about this case. However, before it could be published, he was killed in an accident. These other detectives, while retaining professional respect for the man, concluded that he was wrong in his belief. End quote. Many years later, Alan Bassett himself would voluntarily offer up his DNA in order to clear his name once and for all. Whether or not that has actually happened, we have yet to find out. Our third suspect is Derek Percy. Derek here happened to kill a child on a beach in Victoria only 4 years later in 1969. Although Victoria is over 500 miles southwest from Cronulla, investigators were able to place him there during the time of the murders. Derek Percy is also a suspect in multiple child murders in Melbourne and Sydney. Unfortunately, these links weren't enough to establish anything actionable against the man, and until he died in 2013, Percy was basically the leading suspect for police. And no, unfortunately, he didn't make any deathbed confessions. Sorry. Sadly, that was about it for plausible suspects, or persons of interest, I guess. As for related cases, it appears that there were only 2. According to Wikipedia, 2 far lesser-known murders also occurred during early 1966, in the days following the nationally publicized disappearance of the Beaumont children, which police at the time speculated may have been connected to the Wanda Beach murders. On Saturday, January 29, 1966, a 56-year-old cleaning lady named Wilhelmina Kruger was killed in the Piccadilly Centre on Crown Street in Wollongong. Her bloodied body was discovered around 5:45 a.m. at the foot of basement-level stairs by a butcher who had arrived for work. Having been assaulted 3 floors above, probably around 4:30 a.m., she had been brutally dragged down the escalators and stairs. She was then strangled, stabbed, mutilated, and found naked from the chest down. Police also found cigarette burns in her clothing, and blonde hair was found at the scene. In the time prior to the murder, Kruger had become nervous that someone was watching her, and she had been driven to work by her husband. The lights in the car park within the center had shown recent signs of tampering, including on the morning of the murder. A witness who lived near the center reported seeing a vehicle speeding nearby at around 4:55 a.m. the morning of the murder. This witness described the vehicle as a rusty, cream-colored utility, possibly a Holden or Chevrolet type model, with a plywood canopy attached to the rear of the vehicle. The witness then described the driver as a tall, lean man of disheveled appearance. This report was corroborated by 2 couples who were staying at the center's motel. They had asked a male about a local accommodation shortly before Kruger's murder, and that group also stated that they had heard the sound of a vehicle speeding away shortly after the murder. Their description of the male for whom they spoke to and the vehicle in which he drove matched the description of the speeding driver. Considered one of the most brutal attacks in the history of the state, the case remains unsolved. Some police believe that the murder might have been the work of the Wanda Beach killer, but would not say why. As for the other case, around midnight on Wednesday, February 16, 1966, a 27-year-old shop assistant and sex worker from Bondi named Anna went missing after leaving the taxi club in King's Cross. 10 days later, at around 5:30 p.m. on February 26th, her half-naked, strangled, stabbed, and mutilated body was found by a truck driver who had stopped at the side of, Old Illawarra Road in Manai to change a tire. Most of her clothes and belongings were missing, and drag evidence showed that her body had been moved to a more visible location around 3 to 4 days before her discovery. Police immediately linked her brutal, quote, Jack the Ripper-like murder with that of Kruger's, and investigators from the crime were called in to assist. They believe that murder might have been the work of the, again, Wanda Beach killer, primarily based on circumstantial evidence, and similarities in their MO. And I thought that may have been it, the end of any real theory. But of course, Daily Mail came through again. A pedo serving time for abusing his daughter and his sister allegedly confessed to the Wanda Beach murders. According to this article, in 1972, quote, 7 years after the teens were bashed, stabbed, and assaulted, a young man allegedly confessed to the crime. He told his then-girlfriend, "I did that." The alleged confession came to light years later when the man was being investigated for sexually abusing his daughter. The victim, now in her 40s, told police in 2016 that she had been the subject to the abuse at the hands of her father from 4 until 11. The victim's mother revealed to police that her former husband claimed he was the Wanda Beach murderer when the couple first started dating. While we were sitting in his car, he turned to me and out of the blue asked me if I remembered the Wanda Beach murders. Then he said quite calmly, "I did that." The woman told police she felt startled but thought he was making a joke. She responded with something like, "Don't be silly, no you didn't." She continued, "He didn't respond immediately, but after looking at me and seeing the startled expression on my face, he said something similar to, 'Nah, I'm only kidding.'" This woman then advised officers she believed her former husband was, quote, "capable of anything." That man is now serving an 8-year prison sentence for the sexual abuse of his daughter. Unfortunately, the man cannot be named to protect the identity of his daughter. But Marianne's brother, Hans Schmidt, said that this revelation hopefully should lead to further investigations. As of that posting, I believe authorities have not commented any further on this alleged confession, but I truly hope they haven't ignored it completely. That would bum me out. And that's about where we're at now. The case, technically is still very cold, but we'll see where that guy's alleged confession goes. Oh, this'll piss you off. In the year 2008, guess what went missing? AKA, guess what the police threw away? Yep, the killer's DNA that was found at the scene of the crime. "We've looked everywhere, we promise. We can't find it." You don't just lose semen, okay? I have to wash my sheets for a reason. Probably shouldn't have waited so long as to mention that bit, as it's probably definitely the clue that could solve it all. But yes, sadly, that is the end of the Wanda Beach murder story. Impossible to end a cold case on a happy note. Thankfully, there will be another story for you to in after the music today. Thank you all again for the support week after week after week. Truly, it means the world. Okie dokie. Bye-bye. Love you. Oof. Alrighty. Anyone else feel like we should just have a little palate cleanser? Fibbing. This is titled Henry Van Breda, the Man Who Killed His Family with an Axe. Written by Pumza Filani of BBC.com. Quote, a South African paramedic describing the aftermath of the attack on the wealthy Van Breda family said it was the worst thing he had seen in his 39-year career. Blood ran like a waterfall down the stairs, testified now retired Christian Koeg-Lenberg. Again, I'm sorry. More than 3 years after Mr. Christian walked into the midst of that horrific scene, a judge has found the family's only surviving son, Henry, guilty of using an axe to kill his mother, father, and brother. His younger sister, Marley, managed to survive the attack in their home in a gated housing estate in Stellenbosch in South Africa's wine region. Henry Van Breda was 20 at the time of the attack, but the motive for the horrific murders is still unknown. Some believe he did it to inherit the father's multi-million-dollar estate, but it can never be proven. Whatever the motive, investigators and South Africans alike have been shocked by the violent nature of the attack. Martin and Teresa Van Breda were found in a pool of blood on the first floor of their home on the De Zalza Golf Estate on the morning of January 27, 2015. Close by was the body of their 22-year-old son Rudy and their 16-year-old daughter Marley, who was fighting to stay alive. Henry, meanwhile, had sustained only minor injuries. The attacker had moved quickly and with determination. The Western Cape High Court agreed that the extent of the injuries meant that the assailant had intended to kill. Henry Van Breda gave a statement to police soon after the incident, saying that a well-built black intruder was to blame. He described a man wearing gloves and a balaclava, breaking into the family home. A recording of his phone call to the emergency services, made at around 7 a.m., was played to the court. My family and me were attacked by a guy with an axe, he told police. But who would want to kill the family in such a brutal and merciless manner? No one, said Cornelius Andres Van Breda, who testified at his nephew's trial, saying that his 54-year-old brother Martin and his sister-in-law Teresa were loving people who had zero enemies. He told the court that they had been a close-knit family. Initially, Henry's version of events seemed plausible. He had sustained minor lacerations, and South Africa's high crime rate also made it a little bit believable. Many live in fear of, quote, the intruder in the mask. Henry told the court that he wrestled with the intruder, who then stabbed him in the torso with a knife. But 18 months into the investigation, police believed that Henry Van Breda was the only suspect. He would maintain his innocence during the 67-day trial. The court heard that many, if not all, of his injuries had been self-inflicted. The prosecution pointed to many other inconsistencies in his testimony. Why would an intruder seeking to rob a home ignore valuable items downstairs and embark on a killing spree upstairs instead? Henry could not answer that. He also could not answer why there were no signs of forced entry or why he had escaped the deep gashes that his family had suffered. Experts who analyzed those gashes testified that they had come from one attacker who used the same amount of force on each victim. The security experts at the trial all but said that not even Houdini could have broken into the Van Breda's home. The De Zalza Gulf Estate had been described as a, quote, medium security gated community, but in truth, it was considered one of the safest places to live in South Africa, with motion detectors, an alarm system, 24-hour guard patrol, access-controlled gates, and an electric fence. Another inconsistency that unsettled the court was the amount of time that it took Henry to ring for help. Court papers revealed that a distressed Henry called his girlfriend at about 4:42 numerous times, but they all went unanswered. He then searched the internet for local emergency numbers, not calling for help until nearly 3 hours later. It was argued that Henry wanted his family to bleed to death. When asked to account for the time lapse, the young man said he had collapsed after witnessing his family being attacked and remained unconscious for hours. Marley, who underwent extensive surgery and physiotherapy after the attack, still has no recollection of that horrific day, although her extensive head injuries and self-defense wounds were used to lead testimony in court. Of all the victims, Marley had put up the greatest fight. Unlike her mother and brother, who had minor defensive wounds, which may mean they were asleep shortly before the attack, Marley may have seen him coming and tried to fight him off. Her father, Martin, had deep wounds on his back. Delivering his sentence, Judge Desai said this was an indication that he had used his own body to try and shield Rudy from his axe-wielding brother, believing perhaps that his son would not strike him. But he did. Neighbors and close family friends described Henry as always having been the, quote, black sheep of the family. While the other children had been thriving at school and university, he had decided to drop out of his studies. He came back to live with his parents in South Africa in August of 2014, taking a gap year with no real plan in mind. He reportedly also had a drug addiction, leading his parents to threaten to cut off his allowance if he did not clean up his act. Many believe the pressure of not measuring up to the expectations of his perfect family may have driven him to the edge just months after he arrived in South Africa. But justice has now been served for the unsuspecting victims of Henry Van Breda. We still do not know what snapped in the mind of young Henry only that something did, and it left a trail of blood in its wake. End quote. And that, my friends, is the story of the man who killed his family with an axe. I hope you enjoyed our little Australian escapade today. I think it was fun to wiggle around down there. As always, please send me any and all recommendations. I really love getting them. Okie dokie. Bye-bye. Love you.